I have some more kitchen table astronomy with Hampshire College astronomer and the head of Kainat Studios, Dr. Salman Hameed. Given that Kainat Studios mostly broadcasts to the South Asian world, I am the DEI hire here for this segment today for those listeners and viewers. But we are here to talk about the Trump administration's inauguration, manifest destiny to the stars, and the future of DEI at NASA. Where shall we begin?
Well, and if it's the last show that I'm allowed to be here in the U.S., well, it was a great ride. But, I mean, there are many ways to be outraged about right now. And one of the things is like, okay, how do you handle these things? Because there are a lot of executive orders coming, there are a lot of actions coming, and you can find plenty of stuff to be upset about.
Right. Congressman McGovern said on Thursday's show, it's like drinking from a fire hose.
Right. And so I will just focus on just one aspect because we have talked a lot about, of course, astronomy, but also of space exploration, of responsible space exploration. So let's stick with that and just parse it out a little, right? So one of the things is in the inaugural address, President Trump last week explicitly said that after that, the United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, so on and so forth. And then he concluded that part with, and we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. So this is, of course, partly it has to do with Elon Musk as well. That is,
There's a strong desire to go to Mars, to skip going back to the moon and go straight to Mars.
and so that's a Mars direct approach. And even though currently, right now, a lot of the emphasis is actually going to the moon first. And there are all of these issues regarding the moon, but nevertheless, here there is a direct call from the president of going to Mars. Now, this is not the first time. I actually want to make sure I clarify it. President George H.W. Bush actually, back in, I think, 89 or 90, 89, I think that was at the anniversary of the Apollo landing of 1969, so it was the 20th anniversary, and he actually made a similar thing that we should be going to Mars. Then President George W. Bush also said the same thing. But now we are getting to the point where it actually can potentially happen. And Elon Musk, who has the resources to a certain degree, and he has always expressed desire, although oftentimes it's exaggerated, that he actually wants to send humans to Mars and settle Mars. And I would use the word carefully, to colonize Mars. I mean, he actually has said those words. He's also talked about terraforming and things like that. Now, what I want to highlight and what we have to think about is what does that mean? Meaning to say that what kind of values we bring to Mars. On Mars, there are a lot of issues in terms of, for example, what if there is microbial life on Mars? Should we still go there or not? Should we contaminate Mars? Although we have already done that quite a bit with our rovers, but should we bring our whole microbiome of humans over there? What's going to happen over there? And
because the idea is that there could be life in a different phase, microbial life, that's in an evolutionary process, that if humans come with their own microbiome, would interrupt that process or at least dramatically change.
Right, and do we have the right to do that or not? Mm-hmm. Because
it's manifest destiny, Salman Hameed. If only we can kill the indigenous species of the planet Mars, that's just what we love to do.
And that's exactly the place where you have to mention Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
yes.
where the alien species were just making a highway and it just went through the Earth, so who cared? So that's precisely the point, that how do we think about these issues? Because if we are going to Mars, or I would say even from the moon, which is going to set the precedence of our behavior in space, what kind of values we bring in? And if you notice here, and if you notice in Elon Musk's perspective as well, key thing to look at is what kind of rhetoric they are using. And one of the things he talks about oftentimes is saving humanity. Okay, that's fine. Here President Trump is saying about manifest destiny into the stars. But what kind of things are they proposing for the humanity that we have here on this planet? And what are they saying in terms of improving climate, for example, on this planet? And that you don't hear much. So, for example, with I mean, you mentioned Manifest Destiny a couple of times, which has a deep historical problems with that in the 19th century with the America's expansion to the West, which came at great cost of the native populations over there, and also of the environment, for example, buffalo and other.
See the Ken Burns documentary, and listen later this week. We're going to talk to author John Sayles about the Carlisle School and his new book. To Save the Man is the first part of is the title of the book. It's going to be it's a great book.
So so those things we have to think about. So here there is an explicit mention of Manifest Destiny in terms of human expansion into space and onto Mars. So that should give you a pause that at the same time when President Trump mentioned this, in the same speech there was no mention of, for example, the environment, which we all know, scientists know, no, we have to take care of it. There are fires going on, there are floods, there are extreme temperatures, there are all of these things that are happening, and yet he doubled down on the use of fossil fuels. So this is not what it looks like. This is not the lofty rhetoric they often couch their ideas in, but rather underneath it is the same rotten ideas of profit and those type of expansionism and profit that comes in. So in that sense, perhaps the use of Manifest Destiny is appropriate because it is exactly the same problematic stance that the Americans had or the US had with the westward expansion in the 19th century.
Meanwhile, NASA, an organization that we talk about very frequently, is under new management, as is the want of new administrations when they come in. We talked a little bit about the proposed head of NASA, who is another billionaire, who I have on good authority from people who have worked with NASA, might actually be an okay pick. But there is an interim head of NASA, and meanwhile, one of the executive orders that has come down from the new Trump administration has to do with the end of diversity, equity, inclusion, and ableist or accessibility, DEIA programs.
Yeah, and so this goes back to what kind of values we are promoting, or what kind of values if we want to go into space. And NASA, of course, is the organization that is the leader in this thing. What kind of values we prefer? And here, the notice that was sent out, and again, in fairness to all federal agencies, but I'm just talking about specifically to NASA, and the memo that went out, and it was signed by the acting administrator, Janet Petro. And she said this memo was sent out on January 22nd, and it falls under ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. And it says explicitly that these programs divided Americans by race, wasted taxpayer dollars, and resulted in shameful discrimination. And then, perhaps, more disturbingly, it actually asks people, that you basically snitch on your colleagues. It actually says, we are aware of efforts by some in government to disguise these programs by using coded or imprecise language. If you are aware of a change in any contract description or personnel position description since November 5th, 2024, so not when the inauguration happened, but November 5th since the election, to obscure the connection between the contract and DEIA or similar ideologies, please report all facts and circumstances to DEI truth@opm.gov. So I actually like sort of the email address is there's a truth part in it within 10 days. Now, after that it says, and this is sort of almost like 1984 or whatever, there will be no adverse consequences for timely reporting this information. However, failure to report this information within 10 days may result in adverse consequences. This is a memo signed by Janet Petro, by the way, the current head of NASA, sent out to the organization. Now, I should also mention alongside with that if you go to NASA's website, there was an website, nice actually website of Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity. And if you go there now, it says 404, the error code that comes up. But
Page is missing. It's gone.
its page is missing, but underneath it says, and I don't, and I'm pretty sure that was sort of like NASA being funny in the prior times, pre this thing. It says the cosmic object you were looking for has disappeared beyond the event horizon. The problem is that it's not funny anymore.
No, it's not. Yeah.
And that, again, the irony of all of that, and we have, Monte talked, I think, a while back, for example, programs like Star Trek. So this, again, gives a perspective that this type of racial profiling or deep racism, for example, I mean, in the 1960s and before, was much more overt. And in fact, Star Trek itself, the fact that sort of that it was subverting the existing system. So the origins of Star Trek was the fact that Gene Roddenberry wanted to bring in the interracial components onto television, but he could not in the 1960s. And so, in fact, his original idea was having a cop show with interracial grouping, but that was completely a no-no. So he used space. He used a setting in space to have that kind of diversity on the spaceship. And the idea was eventually, we will have racial diversity in there.
And species diversity. They have a Vulcan on there. They have humans on there.
And at the time, which was revolutionary for that, at the height of the Cold War, there was a Soviet person in there. There's a Chinese officer in there, so on and so forth. But
even Martin Luther King Jr. weighed in on this show. Uhura was about to leave the show. Martin Luther King Jr. personally asked her not to leave the show because it was a shining example on television of his dream.
And that is where I just wanted to bring in this contrast, the fact that here you have a memo for NASA, and yes, to all other agencies as well, which actually personifies in some sense the big thinking, the the results that come out from Hubble Space Telescope or James Webb Space Telescope, showing how insignificant we are, and pale blue dot from Carl Sagan looking at how small we are and how unified we are. We don't see any boundaries and color and things like that. And here we go back where NASA has just eliminated any kind of diversity initiatives in there. And the program is, as to quote NASA's own website, it's beyond the event horizon.
Mm-hmm. Let me play devil's advocate. If the dream is really to have a colorblind, deck for the Starship Enterprise in the future, why do we need DEI? Why don't we just hire people on their merit as they are? Why do we need to look into their background and who they are?
I think that's a good question, and a lot of people bring that up. But there are a couple of things regarding that. One is we have to be aware of systemic inequalities or inequities that are in there. And so sometimes people don't make it to the merit levels, not because they are not as smart or they don't qualify in terms of merit, but simply because they don't have the opportunity to show their qualification.
Like perhaps a resume comes across the desk and somebody's last name is Hameed. That may get put into a separate pile than if your last name is Smith.
That is correct.
Not to cast any aspersions to any Smith who may be part of the fabulous 413.
But I also want to highlight, and this is a little bit ironic as well, the difference of opinion or variation or diversity actually is a strength, apart from anything else as well. I mean, if everybody is coming from the same perspective, then you are also getting solutions or thinking about problems in the same way as well. Mm-hmm. But different backgrounds, different perspectives actually add a tremendous strength to it. And here is this is, I think, I recently went to China, and I found I stood out as diversity. And to me, it was just a pleasure coming back, and at the airport, I actually flew into from Detroit, and suddenly seeing amazing racial diversity and at the airport itself. And I think that's the American strength. I don't think I've mentioned it here, but I give an introduction to there is a lecture program that I'm part of, and we talk about American Muslims, for example. And turns out Muslims in America are the most diverse than any place on the planet, which is really incredible because there is no dominant Muslim group from, say, for example, from South Asia or from Africa or from other places, but rather it's from all over the world. So diversity is actually amazing. But I'm going to quote, this was the interview that Janet Petro, who is the current head of NASA,
who signed this memo ending DEI and asking NASA members to snitch if DEI is still going on.
That's right. And so a few years ago, in 2021, she was the head of the Kennedy Space Center. And she was asked this question, sort of like, that is it diversity is good or not? And at that time, she actually really said that diversity is crucial. And she quoted the NASA administrator at that time, Bill Nelson. And she quoted Bill Nelson saying, "We embrace diversity." This is we is NASA. "We embrace diversity because we understand that different opinions, backgrounds, and perspectives create an enriching environment that fuels innovation and personal growth. Every difference of opinion, background, or perspective is an opportunity to learn and build relationships. It is also how we achieve missions of unparalleled complexity and ambition that inspire the world." So here is, by the way, this is being quoted by the same person who has just banished DEI as the acting head of NASA. But there is tremendous strength in diversity. In some sense, I would say, this is what has made America what it is, because it has a pool from all over the world, and then you can also provide perspectives for over the world. And so if you are thinking in terms of space missions, you would like to have diverse perspectives, both in terms of living with other people. So if you are on the moon, or if you have a sort of a settlement on Mars, you will have to deal with other people. You will have to deal with perspective. You have to have sensitivity to that. Not to mention, it will be a strength in terms of thinking about solutions that problems that you encounter and the solutions that you have. People coming in from different backgrounds, different perspectives. That would be a strength and not weakness. But we are not going in that direction, and that is the reason why we have to look beyond the words that are being used. Oh, this is our manifest destiny to go to Mars. Right, but what values we bring in? Elon Musk, oh, I'm saving the planet. That's why we want to go to Mars. But what is he doing here on Earth? Apart from sort of like, of course, supporting far-right groups in different places as well, which also have, I would say, a diversity problem.
Mm-hmm. So if you were looking at the future of space travel and you want to look at some of our favorite space-oriented intellectual properties, do you want a clone army of all the same exact type of person to invade the world? Or do you want the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, a panoply of different people from different backgrounds, different races, even different species, exploring strange new worlds and boldly going where no one has gone before?
Nicely played, Monte, but I would say, and this was one of the great strengths of Gene Roddenberry's vision. We have ended up into Star Trek because he insisted on having a positive vision for the future. He believed in humanity, that despite of all of those things, and again, his original show was in the 1960s, he believed that humans, the best side of humans, or the better nature of our angels is going to come out, and we are going to overcome these things. And in his vision, which was also in Star Trek The Next Generation, and I think Deep Space Nine as well, while he was alive, he mandated that it has to be a positive vision, that humans overcome these things. And for him, these cultural, these various kinds of diversities were crucial. Unfortunately, some of the later movies, especially with J.J. Abrams, who famously said he never watched any of the original Star Trek, they actually gutted this particular vision of him, of Gene Roddenberry's. But in the most recent series, Strange New Worlds, they brought it back. And there are a lot of other shows that you can watch which don't necessarily rely on that. But go back to the vision, 1960s. What drove this diversity perspective within Star Trek? I think that's just wonderful. The visuals may sometimes be cheesy, but hey, underneath it was gold.